Hi, I'm Emma GADDY. This is video response number 1 of Mayhan's article of Big Mama Thornton. So on page 3, Mayhan mentions how there are rock critics that have written overviews of the histories of the lives and music of women and rock. She states that Thornton appears in these studies and is typically placed towards the beginning and grouped among women identified as influential forerunners. She says how these studies state that Thornton sang the original version of Hound Dog and Ball and Chain, but never made much money from her recordings, wore men's clothing on stage, and died in poverty. So she mentions that these are strong starting points, but clearly they do not dive into the importance of her sound and influence at all. So to begin, something that I took from the article was that Thornton was a comedian. She had a wonderful sense of humor, would joke with those on stage with her, and in interviews, basically her charisma was just completely unmatched. This was one of the things that popularized her as an artist. She became known to the young blues revivalist and even helped shape the next phase of rock and roll. She had, clearly, if you've listened to any of her music, an incredible, powerful voice. Would improvise when singing live, and she would even sometimes shift into a spiritual vibe whenever she was singing the blues. During the instrumental breaks of her music, she would enter this sort of call and response with her guitarist, specifically in her hit Hound Dog. This song, for one, was incredibly popular, that it had 10 covers before Elvis Presley even covered it. One of the biggest limitations of this narrative of her just being a symbol, it completely overshadows her significant contributions to what we know as rock and roll. Mayhan states that the something that Thornton says she made popular was more than just Hound Dog. It was the feel, the energy, and the attitude of the rhythm and blues music. Thornton even says that she sang blues. She didn't sing rock and roll. Mayhan mentions that Thornton is undoubtedly one of Elvis Presley's teachers because, as we know, he sat down and listened to tons and tons of records of Black artists, and Thornton was one of them. He would take her snarl and the way that she snaps off her words, specifically in Hound Dog at the beginning of that song. She mentions how he even imported her swagger and her forceful vocals, which we know just to be her powerful voice, and followed her practice of hollering it out. Her song Hound Dog was a very important rock and roll record and was even the first major success for Robbie's Peacock Records. I think I said that correctly. Mayhan states that this is an early example of a successful Black-owned label, which was several years ahead of Motown Records. Another person who she most definitely influenced was Janis Joplin. This is talked a lot about towards the end of the article. She took inspiration from not only her musicianship, but also her unconventional femininity. Because one thing that I didn't mention, that aside from her powerful voice, she was not a conventional woman. I didn't know how to phrase that, I guess, but it's talked about a lot, and Janis Joplin definitely took that from her. It seemed that they even became friends, but we'll get to that in just a second. Mayhan says that both women pushed the boundaries of standard notions of femininity, but above all, they devoted their energy and focus to their music. That was the biggest thing. Thornton and Joplin seemed to become friends, like I just said. Joplin had Thornton open for a couple of her shows, which Elvis Presley never did, which was mentioned at one point that he didn't even respond to her whenever they had reached out, saying if they wanted to work together or perform together. So that's rude. Thornton's song Ball and Chain was popularized by Joplin, which was one of the reasons why they became close. This led Thornton to find herself playing in front of white crowds, which she had not typically done. She did this sometimes backed up by an integrated band as well. She considered rock and roll as nothing but the blues speeded up, or just nothing but the blues sped up, which is kind of true if you think about it. Mayhan states that her attitude and artistry contributed to the shape rock and roll took in the 1950s and 1960s. She mentions how a critic noted that the blues revival was marked by the rise of the guitar as fetish and the reception of white blues fans with the simultaneous evaluation of vocal blues styles. So Mayhan says that these are the conditions that shaped and continue to shape rock and roll music, and that they marginalized the influence of Black women vocalists in spite of the important roles they played in the influence of rock and roll. I guess it's just like a simple overview, summary of all of that. The reason that this narrative of Thornton just being a symbol, it completely overshadows who she was, not just as a person, but as an artist, and how her sound and her energy, her feel, genuinely everything about who she was, how all of that influenced rock and roll so specifically, because from her, other people took inspiration. And then those people, like I just mentioned, Janis Joplin and Elvis Presley, also continued to form rock and roll. But all of that really came back to Big Mama Thornton. So this is a very long video, so I'm gonna stop it now and edit it. But yeah, thank you so much.